All right, next we go line again.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order for the Planning and Zoning Commission for the December 14th, 2020 meeting. It is now 5:02. We'll call this meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is going to be the approval of minutes. They're from our last meeting, which was September the 14th of 2020. If we take a few minutes to review those and see if there's any changes or a motion to accept. Anybody make a motion to accept the minutes as written?
I make a motion we accept minutes as written.
And I'll second it.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We'll move on to agenda item number 3, which will be a public hearing. Consider a request for approval of a development plan for a senior center in a PD, Plan Development District for lots 1 and 2, Block 5, City Block 50 of the Austin Hills subdivision located at 1601 West Austin Street. The request has been submitted by Curtis Architecture, Armory Curtis, case file PD 2020-03.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Elena Chafin, City Planner. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing the second step in our plan development review process, the plan development plan. As a reminder, the purpose of the plan development zoning district is to provide a development of land that is an integral unit for single or mixed use in accordance with a plan that may vary from the established regulations of other zoning districts. The district is intended to implement the goals of the city's comprehensive plan and also to encourage flexible and creative planning to ensure compatibility of land uses and allow for the adjustment of changing demands to meet the current needs of the community. The plan development process is comprised of 3 processes. The first is the concept plan, which is the first step and establishes the plan development district. It also identifies land uses and intensities, as well as general location of thoroughfares, open space, and the boundaries of the district. The second phase is the development plan, which has all of the information of the concept plan, but has additional information related to the general layout and of those specific land uses and their boundaries, and also includes the proposed layout of building and parking and landscaping and some of those development standards that we find in the zoning ordinance. That's the process that we're looking at today. And then after the development plan is approved, the final PD site plan will come back before this board, and you'll have final approval before they begin construction. So just a quick reminder of the plan development review process and where we are at in it. The subject property is part of the Austin Hills PD Plan Development District. The original PD concept plan and development plan was approved in 2004 and includes the entire Austin Hills subdivision, which is primarily made up of a single-family residential development. And then the property that you see highlighted in red is the subject property. These 2 properties were approved for a church on Lot 1, which is that lot that directly fronts West Austin Street. And then behind that Lot 2 was approved for an assisted living facility or a nursing facility. The church is constructed and is currently vacant, and then the back piece, Lot 2, never was developed. The PD concept plan was amended in January of this year to allow for the conversion of the existing church on Lot 1 into a senior center or senior citizens center, with the use of Lot 2 being changed from a nursing home facility to the future addition and outdoor activity area for the senior center. The plan also dedicated a 50-foot building setback and landscape buffer along the eastern boundary of the future addition on Lot 2 to mitigate any negative impacts of the senior center on the adjoining residents. Tonight you're hearing the request to amend the PD development plan, which is that second phase, before the final PD site plan. And this plan contains all the information, again, that was in the concept plan, but also includes detailed information as to the specific land use locations and boundaries. And then the purpose of this process is to ensure that the development actually does comply with the concept plan, and that what's being approved was the intention of the original concept plan layout. This development plan shows the future addition and renovation of the kitchen facilities to accommodate the senior center's meal service operations. It also includes 2 proposed buildings and an extra parking area on Lot 2 to accommodate future expansions of outdoor activity areas. And then you see there's some elevations that kind of provide an illustration of what the final improvements will look like. As I stated, this is part of an existing PD plan development district. Areas to the south and west are zoned A agricultural. Properties to the north are also zoned PD plan development district and are developed as a duplex subdivision. The agricultural zoning district is really more of a default placeholder for property that's been annexed into the city. It can be also designated for areas that are being used for agricultural purposes today, or for areas that may lack infrastructure such as water, sewer, and things of that nature. The proposed zoning is compatible, or the proposed development plan is compatible and should not have any kind of adverse impacts on the adjacent vacant property. As you can see on Lot 1, the church is existing. Lot 2 is the property that's yet to be developed, which is the future phase of the senior center. The Austin Hill subdivision to the east is about 50% built out, with several lots under construction, and then the property to the south and to the west is vacant. The proposed senior center should not inhibit the ability of those adjacent properties to develop in the future. The future land use plan does designate this area as single family, which is described as conventional one-family detached dwellings, and this definition does include duplexes. The comprehensive plan also outlines that schools, parks, and community facilities, such as senior center, should be located close to or within residential neighborhoods, and so this request is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. These are some site photos that were taken last week. These are images that are taken at West Austin Street. So the one in the upper left-hand corner is a street view of West Austin and Opal. And then there is a slight difference in elevation. And so if you're looking at the street, you see that the property does set a little bit high from the street view. And as you move onto the property, those are the photos that are on the bottom, where you see the front entrance of the church. These are some additional photos taken from the rear of the property. You can see in the upper right-hand corner and upper left-hand corner, that's that vacant land. And you can see it's very heavily vegetated. And it's my understanding that the applicant does intend to keep as many of those trees as possible to create a really nice outdoor walking kind of trail, outdoor recreation area. The conditions for approval of a PD development plan are as outlined on your screen. These include the plan being generally consistent with the future land use policies and map adopted in the comprehensive plan, the proposed uses and configuration of uses being compatible with the existing and planned adjoining properties, the general arrangement of streets conforming to our adopted thoroughfare plan, the proposed uses and development densities being consistent with the purposes and standards of the planned development district, and the proposed plan furthering the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Staff does find that the request meets the review criteria for approval of the PD development plan, it's a mouthful, as outlined on your screen, and the proposed plan is consistent with the concept plan that City Council approved earlier this year. And based on these findings, staff does recommend approval of the request. This is an image of the 200-foot notification map. We did send out 15 notices to property owners within the 200-foot notification area. These included 9 owner-occupied single-family residences, 7 residential lots that are currently vacant, 2 single-family lots that are currently under construction, and then 2 duplex lots across the street, across West Austin Street. Our office did not receive any contacts regarding the request. However, back in January, there were residents who attended the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council meeting representing the neighborhood, and they were in support of the initial request. And this item is scheduled to be heard at tomorrow night's City Council meeting. And that concludes staff's presentation. The applicant and property owner are also in attendance should the commission have any questions, and I'll conclude with that.
Any other questions for Elena? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Again, this is an open meeting, so anybody like to speak for or against, feel free to speak on behalf or against. Seeing none. Army, would you like to speak about what the plan is, if you don't mind?
Afternoon, everybody. Army Curtis with Curtis Architecture, representing the owner of the senior center in this case. What we have done is we have figured out and gone through the kitchen addition. That's the first phase of the project and is represented on this plan. So as far as its location, its access, this is all pretty firm at this point, and we're trying to move ahead with the actual construction documents and getting ready for permitting. So we haven't really done anything with the existing parking lot. We've been able to keep it as is. The main access into the kitchen will be from that back parking lot, so it's on the bottom of the sheet there, leaving the front and that porte-cochere more of a public access area. There will be up to 4 standalone refrigerators and freezers on that west side. So those are the little boxes you see under the new addition. And they will be extending the sidewalk areas out from the existing sidewalk system on that west side to match the new addition. We will be planting some new streetscaping trees along Austin Street to help comply with the general ordinance that the city has right now. And we're also, as part of this, updating the electrical system. That's one of our last hurdles right now, is getting with Encore and understanding, what it means to upgrade power out there. But all the other utilities we've gotten control with and feel comfortable with. And then the rest of the plan, it's still developmental, if you will, at this point on Lot 2 in the back. But what we are trying to establish is that, buildings of a similar use, so assembly type uses for seniors specifically, would be placed in the general areas that we're showing here outlined as future buildings. There will be, to some degree, another and new parking lot that services those buildings, as well as a drop-off area to service those buildings as well. The general intent is that after that, the rest of the lot will be left open. Part of the senior center's activities, if you will, is open space. To be able to have open walking areas, landscaping, outdoor congregation, and so on. And so that's where the majority of that lot will be left open at least at this point in time.
So as far as the parking, this addition that you're adding, there's still ample parking with the building that's there already, I assume, because you're adding extra square footage. So I was just trying to read that, so that there's plenty of parking. You won't have to add any additional parking to the building that's there now, correct?
Correct. There are 84 existing spaces there.
Okay.
And then just doing the calc back to the assembly use of the existing building and the addition, the kitchen addition, I'm only coming up with 46 required spaces, so we're well within parking lot requirements.
So those 2 back buildings, there's nothing, have they got anything proposed for those at this time?
Generally, they will be some type of assembly type of use too. So whether they're additional classrooms or multi-purpose type of rooms, that's generally what we're looking at using them for. Flexibility is one of their main keys in trying to use not only the existing building but also these future buildings.
Okay.
So they'll predominantly be big open rooms. There will be restroom facilities and everything associated to those buildings as well. But for the most part, they'll be able to use them in different ways.
Okay. Do they plan on renting them or leasing them for events or anything for the neighborhood, or?
That I couldn't answer.
Okay.
I don't know if really it's been thought out
Discussed.
to that degree.
Okay.
But the overwhelming, or the overall idea is the fact that they are a multi-purpose type of use in the buildings.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Mills, Ken, do you have any questions? Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Army.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Mr. Kelly, would you like to speak? I put you on the spot, sorry.
Yeah, you did. Mike Kelly, I'm the chairman of the Nacogdoches Commission on Aging, which operates as the senior center. And I think Mr. Curtis answered all the issues that you might have here. Like he said, we're flexible, we're guided by what the demand is from the senior population. That's what we do, is provide activities where 10 years ago it was dominoes and catfish. Today we're more focused on activities, a lot of physical activities, and the demand for them is larger than what we can accommodate over at our Harris Street location. You know, we've been there going on 50 years, and Nacogdoches County bought and owns that building, which has helped us out tremendously. And we're trying to ultimately have probably about a $2 million complex here for seniors and are ready to get going on it. But yeah, flexibility is key on what we need today may not be what we need next year. You know, if the demand is for adult learning in computer classes, well, we're going to partner with somebody and put those classes on. If it's more physical activity, it's going to be more physical activity type classes. We're driven by the senior population, and it has changed a lot in just the last few years.
And as far as the kitchen, y'all are, I mean, obviously you're needing a really large kitchen because y'all have a large delivery program too, don't you, correct?
We do the Meals on Wheels program is a senior center program. But we also do, in times that aren't restricted by COVID, we do a lot of congregate meals, and there's a large population that is their activity for the day, to get up and come meet their friends for a free meal or a cheap meal. We ask for a $2 donation for some of the meals, but yeah, we provide a lot of home cooked type meals there at the senior center. And
So do you have any idea what will happen to the current facility?
like I said, it belongs to Nacogdoches County. They've treated us very well. We've added a lot to the property, but that's their property. And I haven't spoke with the judge as to what they intend to do with it, but I would assume it's still usable.
So the people that live in the assisted living apartments now, I know they come over and eat regular. Any idea how that will affect them?
We hope to be able to talk with Brazos Transit about making, I know nothing about their routes, but about making the new senior center a stop. And really, you'd be surprised, very few from those apartments come over and utilize the senior center. And I would have thought that they all would, but no, they come from all over, many in that neighborhood that we hope to continue to see there, but they come from all over Nacogdoches County.
Okay.
Do you have any questions? Ken or Mr. Mills?
No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions for Elena? Well, at that point, then I will entertain a motion to accept or deny the motion to accept this next phase of the PD plan developments phase of this development. Is there a motion for or against?
I'd make a motion to approve whatever language needs to follow that.
It would be amendment to the Plan Development District Development Plan.
Okay.
Thus said.
so we to approve a amendment to.
Amendment,
I second that.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll move on to section number 4, the work session. Receive a report and hold a discussion to give staff direction regarding public notifications and distance requirements.
Thank you. This is a work session item, so it's just a report. We'll have some discussion and Q&A, but there's no action that's needed on this item. We're not necessarily looking for any kind of direction, but we wanted to present this to the commission because we will be presenting the same item to City Council later in January. And this is meant to just, one, provide some explanation, and two, talk about what some other cities do as far as best practices for notification requirements. So with that, over the past several months, our planning office has received a lot of questions in regards to our public notification requirements. A lot of those have stemmed from a recent zone change on Logansport Street, which I'm sure several of you are familiar with. And so since then, the city manager's office has asked us to bring forward a work session item to present to council to, for one, provide an overview of our public notification requirements, two, explain where they came from, where we get these rules, and three, provide some findings based on research of other Texas communities who might go above and beyond the minimum requirement. So with that, we will get on with it. So our public notification requirements are outlined in the zoning ordinance in section 118-132, notice of public hearings. And any public hearing that's required by the zoning ordinance has to comply with these standards. These include text changes to the zoning ordinance itself. It also includes revisions to the zoning map, so changes in district boundaries. It also includes public hearings for specific use permits and things like variances that are heard by our zoning board of adjustment, and also plan development districts like you just heard. Thank you very much. The first requirement talks about the notice that we provide in writing. So before the 10th day, before the date of the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, we do have to provide written notice to all property owners that are located within 200 feet of the subject property. And those are indicated by the most recently approved municipal tax roll. So the Central Appraisal District provides all of that property owner information. We provide a map, download the data, and that's how we get the address list of the people that we submit the written notice to for the public hearing. There's also a clause that speaks to opposition of the request. So if we receive written opposition from those residents that are located within the 200-foot buffer, if we receive opposition from 20% of those property owners, then it does trigger a supermajority vote by the Planning and Zoning Commission to recommend approval for that to move forward, and also by City Council. And so those are specific regulations just for those property owners that are within 200 feet of that subject property. We also have notification requirements for the City Council meeting that precedes that. So before the 15th day, before the date of the City Council hearing, we have to provide notice in the published official newspaper of the community. So that would be our Daily Sentinel. And so we provide regular notices for all of our public hearings for City Council, including other departments use that as well. But we specifically use it for our Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, like zone changes and specific use permits and things of that nature. So these are found in our zoning ordinance. These requirements are derived from Texas Local Government Code, which basically dictates and outlines all of the different stipulations that home rule cities have to comply with if you're going to adopt zoning regulations or district boundaries within your community. And so the language is very similar. It's almost verbatim. It talks about the 15th day before the City Council meeting having the published newspaper article, and then it also references the 10th day before the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting where you have to notify all those property owners within 200 feet based on the approved municipal tax roll. And so these are rules that all Texas cities have to comply with if they do decide to adopt zoning regulations and zoning maps and so forth and so on. Some Texas communities do choose to adopt more restrictive standards, or by policy provide courtesy notices to those people that are outside of that 200-foot notice requirement, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So some of the courtesy notifications that may or may not be either codified in communities or maybe just a matter of policy include mailed notices that are beyond that 200-foot buffer. They also include letters to neighboring or adjoining HOAs or neighborhood associations that might be within the area. They also include posting physical signs on the property. So if someone were to drive by, there would be a sign with a case number and then a contact information for you to follow up and get more information about that proposed zone change or application. A lot of communities also provide additional online advertising for their public meetings. They use social media campaigns such as Facebook, Twitter, some of those name brands that you're used to. And for special zone change applications like a planned development district or specific use permit, a lot of cities either require or highly recommend neighborhood meetings where the developer or applicant will actually reach out and meet with the neighborhood before even submitting an application and get some feedback from the community. And those are usually attended by staff as well. So staff conducted a peer city review to get an idea of where Nacogdoches stood in comparison to some other Texas communities in regards to how we administer those notification requirements. Bryan, Nacogdoches, and Lufkin all have very similar requirements. It's the 200-foot requirement that's codified by state law, and also the 15-day newspaper notice that's required in the local publishing editorial. Some other communities that go above and beyond include Huntsville. So Huntsville actually, in their zoning ordinance, codified a 300-foot buffer, and all of those property owners within that 300 feet are actually subject to the 20% rule that I mentioned earlier, where if 20% of the residents submit written opposition, then you have a super majority vote. They also post physical signs on the property for people that are just driving by to get more information on the application. Denton also has a 200-foot rule, but they also, as additional courtesy, put signs on the property, and they provide a courtesy notice to property owners within 500 feet. And so you have one letter that goes to the property owner notices within the 200 feet, and then you have another letter that goes to those people beyond that. And in that letter, it talks about the difference between if you're within the 200 feet, you can actually submit a written response, an opposition, or for. And then if you're outside, it talks about it being specifically a courtesy notification of the upcoming meeting. Missouri City has the same requirements that we do. They also notify all property owners outside of that boundary, but within 250 feet. Georgetown has codified the 300-foot boundary, very similar to Huntsville, and they also include HOAs that are in the area for that. San Marcos codified a 400-foot buffer requirement that is also subject to that 20% written opposition rule. And then at the official's discretion, they can expand beyond that based on maybe based on the application or kind of the nature of the development. Plano has the same requirements that Nacogdoches does, the 200-foot rule that's dictated by state law, and they go above and beyond and provide a courtesy notice to all property owners within 500 feet, and then HOAs within 1,500 feet of that subject property. And then the city of Austin has a codified notification requirement of 500 feet that is also subject to that 20% written opposition rule.
So as far as including HOAs, you're just saying that if the HOA is within that 300 feet, you just let the HOA and they can let the whole neighborhood know or something? Is that what, I'm just trying to.
Typically, these are HOAs that are registered with the city. So the cities that do provide the HOA notice, they have some sort of program where HOAs or neighborhood associations register with the city to receive newsletters or updates or things like that. So they have a directory of neighborhood associations and HOAs that have registered with the city to receive those types of updates and things like that. We do not.
Okay.
Several of our neighborhoods are older and historical, and maybe they had neighborhood associations at one time,
Sure.
but they don't anymore. And so we could start to develop a program like that, but then it would be difficult to go back to existing neighborhoods and how do you notify them? But
Maybe the active ones are, but that's what I was just wondering. Okay.
yeah, and part of this discussion is to talk about, well, are there some things that we can adopt as policy that we don't have to do a code ordinance for, that would maybe be something simple that we can just incorporate into our regular routine? But we just wanted to give you an idea of where we sit in comparison to some of the other Texas communities. There's not a lot of cities that do or that operate beyond the parameters of the state code. There are some, but it's, and then it's a mix. Some people go above and beyond the actual dimension of the buffer. In some instances, it's just a physical sign that's on the property, and then sometimes it's the neighboring HOAs to let them know, hey, there's something going on in the neighborhood. And so, as part of this research, we did just want to talk about some of the benefits, the pros and cons of this type of notification. Of course, the pros are that you get the word out and you're very transparent and you really engage the community and you try to be as open as possible about your public meetings. The other is just a resource-based con. You know, of course, the more notifications that you do, the more staff time it takes. Sometimes you have to increase your budget because of mailings and things of that nature. But overall, I think the biggest concern, or I guess the biggest issue that came up when researching these cities is that sometimes when you notify those property owners that are beyond the 200 feet, but they're not included in that 20% for the written opposition, it can create some confusion. And so just if, you know, we do decide to move forward with that, and we'll be asking for some direction from City Council, but if we do decide to move forward with that, we'll have to be very intentional and specific about the types of notifications that we're sending out and the messaging and things like that to make sure that we don't create confusion within the community. And that actually concludes my presentation, just very informational. I just wanted to give you guys an update and kind of let you know the type of notifications that we do, how that compares to other similarly situated Texas communities. What we'll be presenting to council next month to see if they'd like to give direction for us to explore some of these alternative notification requirements. So with that, there's no public hearing, but I am available for questions or discussion or any feedback.
What are your thoughts about making that buffer wider, like going to 300? Do you see a benefit or do you see, you know, negative things in that way? I'm just wondering, you know, if going to a bigger buffer is better or worse, or, you know, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a better or worse. I think it has a bigger impact depending on the area of town. You know, we have areas of the city that are very dense and have subdivisions that include a lot of lots. And so when you expand that buffer, you can really catch a lot of properties. Versus in a commercial area or industrial area, that extended buffer may not pick up any additional properties. And so I think it's just one of those things that goes above and beyond to try to create some additional awareness in the community. Just letting people know, hey, I know you're not in the buffer requirement, but it still impacts you because whether you live 200 feet or 300 feet, you're going to be impacted by that development. And so I think it's just a way of trying to encourage that additional community engagement. I think there is a distinction between, you know, 200 feet and 500 feet. That can have a substantial difference. But as far as good or bad, I think it's just different and based on the community's needs and desires and how engaged we want to be with the residents whenever we're making those kind of changes.
And signage too. Yeah, that may. I see a lot of people, a lot of other cities are doing that. That may not be a bad idea either. I don't know.
Well, and I think a lot of this impacts rental property versus people who own their lots. So one of the issues that came up specifically with Logansport Street, and it comes up with other projects as well, is that oftentimes these areas are, these properties are in areas that have a lot of rental property. And so you may notify all the property owners, maybe only 50% of them actually live there. So when you talk about the impact of the residents versus the owners, then I think expanding that boundary can have a big difference. And when you talk about the signs, you know, when you talk about the HOAs and things like that. So I think there are some things that we could adopt based on some of these other best practices from the community that wouldn't have a huge impact to our budget, maybe just a couple of extra steps, but would just assist us in engaging the community on a little bit bigger level and getting some more responses.
So this is posted on the website whenever we have an open meeting.
Yes, we do post our agenda online. Now, some cities will actually post on their planning webpage, on the front page, notice of public hearing. We don't do that, but that is something very easily that we could accommodate. We could make the change next week and just provide a banner that says, hey, there's a meeting next week. And so when you see online, I think most cities post their agenda online, but then in some communities, the planning department will actually on their webpage post a big banner that talks about the upcoming meetings. So I think that's something that we'll probably go ahead and just incorporate anyway, just as an additional measure that doesn't take a lot of effort.
I think it's a good idea.
Any other social media outlet that you guys use?
We do have the Planning and Zoning Department doesn't have a specific webpage, but we do share information through the general city website. Whenever we were going through our 2020 census campaign, that was a huge avenue for us to get the word out. And so we will be following up with our communications department after we have the council briefing to talk about different ways that we can maybe have regular meetings scheduled, regular postings that we can just send to our communications department that they can just schedule. So that way it's just a seamless.
I would imagine with the newspaper going to 2 days a week, it makes it hard to publicize that meeting that way as well.
It does limit us to timing, so we always post in the Sunday paper. And so depending on when an application is submitted and when the meeting is, sometimes we're posting, a week in advance, sometimes it's a day.
Right.
So it does limit our ability to be flexible in what kind of items go to what meetings. And so it does create additional limitation.
Questions, Nancy? Okay. Ken?
Yeah, I think I missed the meeting that maybe spurred this research project. But was the issue that people felt like they weren't given enough notice, or that they just didn't like the decision?
Well, I think maybe it was a combination of the two. And if you remember back in August, that was whenever we were having a lot of issues with the Postal Service. And so for like 2 weeks, all mail was delayed. And so I think it was just a perfect storm where you had people out of town for the summer, you had mail that was delayed by weeks. Some people got the notice in advance, some people got the notice the day before the meeting. And so I think it just created this scenario where people felt like the notifications that they received weren't inconsistent. And in that case, maybe it was true, but it wasn't no fault of the city. It was just the scenario that ended up playing out. And so I think it brought to light some of those issues because either people were out of town or they received the notice later. And so there was just some confusion about notifying property owners versus residents and when we sent it out versus when they got it. And I think that was that's where that stemmed from, a big source of the confusion.
In your opinion, do you think we should be more proactive about notifying, or do you feel like we do a sufficient job?
Well, I feel like anything that we can do to be proactive and engage the community is a positive. I think that we have to be careful about setting expectations. I think if we are going to notify outside the 200-foot requirement, there's two different ways that you can do it. You can either codify it and say that, all right, we're going to notify within 300 feet or 400 feet, and the city is going to decide to allow all of those residents within that buffer area to count towards the 20% requirement for written opposition. Or we could take a stance and say, all right, we're going to keep following our minimum 200-foot requirement, but maybe as a courtesy, we will notify beyond that boundary, but then be careful when we're distributing that literature to make sure that people understand, you are within the 200-foot buffer, and here's all the things that come into play with that. And this is just a courtesy to let you know that there's something happening in the neighborhood, and we invite you to come. But we want to be careful that people understand if they have standing to oppose, because what you don't want is a lot of people to show up to a meeting and oppose, and then find out that their opposition or their support didn't actually count towards a percentage or something like that. So it's just providing some additional education and making sure that we're very intentional and explicit whenever we are sharing information and distributing literature to the community.
Okay,
Does that
thanks.
answer your question?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I guess see your little box.
I'm not sure that everybody understands this. Make sure, as far as like how the 200 or 300 foot, like when you're doing the mapping, that it's the city does the mapping, GIS mapping to make that circle to find the property owners, and then inside that circle, then they pull the tax rolls to see who owns and send letters to them. Is that's the process, correct?
Yes, we have a GIS mapping system that actually, our parcel data is linked to the Central Appraisal District. So we have a software that will generate that 200-foot buffer based on the size and shape of the subject property that's being requested for a zone change or specific use permit. Our software generates that buffer, and then it selects all of those parcels those CAD parcels, Central Appraisal District properties, within that buffer and downloads an address list. And that's the list that we use to generate all of those public notification requirements. And so oftentimes there's some confusion between property owner versus resident, because we have a lot of rental property in town, because we're a college town. And just in general, a lot of cities have rental property, so in that
So-
respect, there is sometimes there's some confusion about, well, I live within 200 feet, well, I didn't get a letter. Well, that's because you don't own the property, and we only send notices to the property owners.
Okay, yeah. That's what I was gonna ask again.
And I should have clarified that in the beginning. I
No.
apologize for that.
Any other questions?
Right,
Katie?
and we will, like I said, we're going to be presenting this item in early January to City Council, and we'll come back and let you guys know if we've received any direction, move forward, or make any changes, and keep you guys updated.
So y'all gonna have kind of, the city council just kind of a workshop, and just kind of come up with some ideas and then bring it back to us, is what you're saying, correct?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Do you feel like it would be helpful if we made a recommendation to council on what we think should happen on this issue?
Absolutely, we are going to let them know that we presented this item to you, and we'll let them know your questions, your concerns, any kind of direction that the commission felt that we should pursue, or actually additional alternatives that you'd like us to research and bring back. So absolutely, that's why we're having this discussion. We want to invite your feedback, your comments, and then we will take that to City Council next month. So absolutely.
Do you have something specific in mind, Ken?
Well, I would just say that if I'm okay with increasing the radius, because I do feel like sometimes when we see those plats and it says here's the notification circle, it doesn't touch a whole lot of tracks that are probably affected by the zone change, but are slightly outside, or maybe even, they may be 400 feet away, but they're given the way that our land use is around here, sometimes that's just how it works. And so I think that extending the radius would make sense, but I agree that it has to be done in a way where everyone understands what their standing is, because that could be a very difficult thing to navigate, especially for city council, if they're trying to figure out who has standing to complain and who doesn't, or who can really vote and who can't on a certain issue. So I think whatever we do needs to be as simple as possible, so to avoid those issues.
I would agree with Ken, just like the PD that we voted on today. When you look at who was sent a letter, it didn't include the whole Austin Hill subdivision.
Now, yes, you are correct. And now, in that regard, we did work really closely with the property owner, encourage them to reach out to that neighborhood, because he's still on the HOA board, and make sure that they were well aware and they understood the change that was being proposed. So oftentimes we will recommend that the applicant reach out to a neighboring neighborhood or property owners and include them in that dialogue, but it's not a requirement. And so it's, some cities do actually require that as part of your checklist on certain applications. Some simply make strong recommendations. We make a strong recommendation kind of depending on the location and the proposed use.
Do we have criteria established for when you decide to do a community meeting as opposed to notifications through the mail?
No, ma'am, there's no set criteria. I think it's primarily based on staff experience, the intensity of the land use and the adjacency of that land use to established neighborhoods and residential areas. That's typically what triggers it, especially if there is an established neighborhood association or active HOA or something like that, where it's easy to contact those people and coordinate a meeting. Sometimes it's difficult to do that because you don't have a single point of contact, or you don't have an organized a neighborhood group. So, but we do try to encourage that where it's available.
Yeah, I think something that I think about is being able to have, like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head, having a general central location that everybody goes to, like if it's the city of Nacogdoches, it says the planning and zoning meeting, this is what's gonna be in the agenda, and then being able to, advertise that, it kind of drives everybody to that, because then, like you said, the newspaper's kind of hit or miss on the timeframes, and so being able to put that on the website or whatever that is, and then drive everybody there that knows that, and that may be a good way of, getting the word out in a way in advance to give people ample time, you know, I think that would be kind of the way of the new technology for sure, so.
Yeah, another tool that we could implement that's used in other cities just generally for notification purposes is some cities will create a email mailing list or email subscription for you to subscribe to and get notifications for any public meeting, whether it's zoning board of adjustment, planning and zoning commission, parks and recreation, and it's automatic, so they don't have to go back and check the website. They'll just get an automatic email, and it could also apply to
Or if there's a
events
misprint,
downtown.
they can come to your website and see what is actually
Yes,
on the
ma'am.
agenda.
Yes.
If, as I'm remembering what I read regarding the Logan Sport issue, there seemed to be a feeling that there was a lack of sensitivity of the historical nature and that it should have been a broader discussion.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think figuring out how we avoid walking into that in the future, because it's not always easy to know what those sensitive things are. It takes a base of experience and some voices with input into that.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And in that scenario, the closest historical zoning district, the overlay area, was a little bit over 800 feet away. So it was substantially outside of the buffer area. It was at the end of the street, surrounded by either vacant or rental property. And so again, you know, it is kind of a discretionary item based on the use, based on kind of the existing neighborhood. And yes, it can be very,
And I think part of what I was looking at in that is the perception that something was ignored, whether on purpose or not, and to avoid that perception of avoidance of a bigger notification or a bigger meeting.
yeah, yes. Well, and I think there's always opportunity to improve. You know, when you take a look at our processes, we've been doing things the same way for a long time, and that doesn't mean that's the best way to do them. And so sometimes it takes a situation like this to really force you to review your processes and procedures and say, hey, is there a way that we could do it better?
Sure.
Probably. I think there's always an opportunity to be more transparent, to be more thorough, to provide more outreach efforts. And so we have been evaluating some of those. Some of the things that we've looked at, we've already made changes to the actual content of our notification letters. We've added additional information on how you can respond and the different ways that you can do that and all the different ways that you can contact us. And so it already has spurred change in our internal policies to be more clear, to provide more information and let people know, hey, there's more than one way for you to respond to this item versus showing up to a physical meeting. And so I think that was some of the confusion too, because a lot of that information wasn't detailed in the letter that we've been sending out for a long time. And so, yes, sometimes it does take a controversial project like that to bring things into light
Bring a new
for the
focus
better.
to it. And just one other thing, I haven't seen a letter or a notification to know the language that's used, but again, to realize we're reaching out to citizens that don't necessarily think in the same language that that we see or we think about, and to be as clear as possible as to what we're really talking about. Yeah.
Yes, and so as an example, for the item that you guys just heard tonight, we have a standard letter, but it doesn't really explain what's being proposed. And so our typical language is that this is an amendment to a planned development district for this property. Here's the applicant information. But we were actually very explicit that this is a senior center development plan, in a established plan development district with a concept plan that was approved for the same thing almost a year ago. And so that way, when someone reads the letter, they don't have to call and ask us what it's for. Everything that they need to know about that project
That's
is in the
the idea.
letter. And so we are constantly revising and changing, and we will do custom letters based on the type of project, just to make sure that we're very explicit and there's no confusion about what's being proposed. And so those are some changes that we just made in recent months. A lot of that, it was triggered by the discussions that came about from the Logansport zone change. So it's,
Good. I think it would also, just an opinion, be just considerate of a renter for that letter notice to go to the resident. As opposed, I mean, as well as the actual property owner, but that resident or
Maybe do the
renter,
Physical address
right.
too, yeah.
that renter could be a long-term renter and have, you know, an interest in their surroundings as well.
Whereas the owner is sitting hundreds of miles away
Right,
and couldn't
yeah.
give a
Right.
flip.
Yeah.
and I think that's something that we could absolutely explore. We would have to we'd have to ensure that we're acknowledging that that's a courtesy notice, and make sure that we're distinguishing that difference. But yes, and some of these could be simple policy changes. Some of these may require additional action by city council if it does require us to increase our fees or something of that sort. But yes, that speaks to the misunderstanding that we sometimes get with residents who are confused about why they didn't get a letter when they back up to the property. And so something as simple as a postcard could be something that we could incorporate that would be relatively cheap, depending on the size of the project. But that's a great idea. And these are all things that we'll take to council as things to explore or recommendations from the commission. Any other
Maybe
questions?
even the postcard could direct them to your website for more information. You know, I guess give them all the legal that you have to, but for more explanation of what is a PD or,
Yeah, absolutely.
You're receiving this because something is gonna happen
Yeah.
next to you.
Right.
If you wanna know what, go to the.
No doubt. Just as a courtesy, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think probably most developers, you know, if you had to raise your fees, I know, you know, if you had to go to a higher application fee to cover some of that, I think most developers, you know, if you went from 300 to 500, I don't think it's not gonna be, they're not gonna do a development because of not doing that. So being able to cover some more of those costs, it would, you know, wouldn't be a bad idea either, so.
And typically when we're looking at properties, we're looking at small properties. If we had a 1,000-acre project that required us to send hundreds of notifications, I think we could probably make a special request of the applicant to say, hey, this is much more expensive than our typical applications. We're gonna charge you this additional assessment based on what it's gonna take for us to notify. It could just be an alternative based on what those costs actually come out to be. So there's a lot of tools. Instead of just increasing the fees, we could assess it based on how much it's actually gonna cost us to do that advertising.
Worked for an entity where it was just a pass-through. Whatever the real cost was, that's what the developer paid.
Mr. Mills, Ken, y'all have any comments or thoughts?
No, I've said my piece.
Mr. Mills, are we good?
We good. I'm just listening at the, extending the, from 200 to 300 feet. That might need to be considered because it will cut back on, a lots of problems if it stayed at 200, but if you go to 300, you got a lots more problem we have to deal with planning and zoning is for something you have to look at.
Yeah, so speaking to that, I think whenever I think of, extending the boundary, really the main con that I think about is if you have a project that is controversial or that is going to be opposed by the neighborhood, and then you have a large crowd that's drawn, trying to, filter through, okay, how many of these written responses are from the property owners versus how many are just from the notification area, and then whenever you have a room, it can be hard to make that distinction. But, you know, those scenarios probably are few and far between, and the benefits may outweigh some of that confusion that you might have for one or two projects.
Again, yeah, going above and beyond the Texas Property Code, maybe, you know, just showing that we're trying to do more, may be beneficial in doing, you know, a larger buffer and maybe signs or whatever that looks like, but doing a little above what they're asking or what the requirements are. Again, it's a perception thing that just says, hey, we really do and truly do care about what the citizens have to say and their thoughts. And so I'm kind of saying, look, we're going above what a lot of other communities are doing, I think is something worth considering for sure.
All right, well, if there are no additional questions, thank you for your feedback. And we will be providing this in summary form, and I'll be letting you guys know that exact date that we're taking it to City Council. I believe it's the first meeting in January, but we'll send you guys out a reminder.
Any other thoughts or anything else anybody has? Wonderful.
I have nothing.
I'll adjourn the meeting. It is
Oh, wait,
5:50.
I'm sorry, RJ, we have one more,
Oh, did I miss something?
discussion possible action on future agenda items.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I missed that. A discussion and possible action on future agenda items. A planning and zoning member may inquire about a subject for which notice has not been given. A statement of specific factual information or the, what is that word? Or the recite, I don't know what that word is.
Recitation.
Recitation of existing policy may be given. Any deliberation shall be limited to a proposal to place the subject on an agenda for a subsequent meeting. So walk me through that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, so this is just, it's kind of a catch-all for anything that's not specifically listed on the item, for the commission to ask questions of staff, points of clarification, to request future agenda items. Perhaps it's a workshop item on plan development procedures, or perhaps it's an update to one of our long-range plans. The last time that we met, you guys did request a development update list. We talked about actually just generating a monthly report that we could include as a link in the actual agenda and online. We are still working through those traps, but we hope to have that on the next agenda. And I also wanted, before I open it up for any kind of questions or inquiries from the commission, I want to take a minute to introduce our newest team member. Juan Paulette is our planning technician. He was previously the building permit technician for inspections and worked at the airport before that. So we are very excited to have Juan on board, and he's been a great addition to the team. And you'll be receiving a lot more correspondence from Juan in the future.
Thank you. So in other words, this is the part where we just need, if we have any other things that we'd like to discuss or have on the agenda, this is where we would discuss those, is what you're saying, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What is recitation of existing property? What is that? I don't even know what that is.
Recitation of existing policy, so just reiterating current policy and codes. So if there's a question about a certain requirement in the zoning ordinance, or a question about a certain policy or procedure that we follow, like our public notification requirements, this is an opportunity for the commission to ask clarifying questions, like just either points of clarification for interpretation or how we've applied it, and things like that. Or, you know, you could ask questions about something that you've seen around town, any kind of development or activity that's going on. We hope to capture that in that future development list update that we'll be bringing forward next month.
We get that question a lot, so that's good to have those information.
Well, I'll ask right now, what's going on North Street down by Walmart? I mean, I know they're repaving, but
Steve Bartlett, our city engineer,
He just
left. Well, he had a previous meeting, so North Street, Walmart, this new sidewalk
paving.
construction. TxDOT is installing new sidewalks.
Yes,
They're
but-
repaving and then they're pulling up the pavement too.
Right.
They're doing it at
Right.
the same time, which
Are
is crazy.
Yeah.
yes, makes it super inconvenient.
Yes, well, and that's part of the broader sidewalk project that they have along University
Yeah.
and other sections, and
Is that gonna come this direction? The way that they've done those 4 lanes and repaved them, are they gonna come this direction, repaving?
I'm not sure, but we will find that information out, and we'll follow up with you guys. We'll send you an email, and we'll see if we can get like a schedule those improvements. Sorry, I don't have that information for you available right now.
Just wondering how long we need to avoid that area.
There are,
That's the real question.
That's the real question.
there are inquiring minds out there,
Yes.
or,
The
yeah,
Nacogdoches Inquirer.
yeah, mhm,
Yes,
who are concerned that all of these sidewalks are local monies being spent where they would not choose to be putting in sidewalks.
Yeah, so that's also a common topic of confusion between what's TxDOT and what's city property. Most of our major thoroughfares, University, North Street, the Loop, all of those are owned and operated by TxDOT. Those sidewalk projects that are going in are typically funds that are available through grants. The city does have to apply for those and pursue those in order to get approved, and we do that on a regular basis. So while it's not city money, we have gone out and actively tried to get those funds for those improvements. But
It is
yes,
a constant education
Yes, ma'am.
process.
And I think it's great that they're being done. The sidewalks are being done. That's great. They're needed.
But it's just amazing the amount of ignorance, I mean, that's out there.
well,
Or
and
lack of knowledge, let me.
now, if you go on our city website, we actually have a public GIS map. And I had to double check, but I do believe there's actually a right-of-way layer, and it'll show up in red, the city right-of-way, and everything that's not red is TxDOT. So that's a useful tool that we try to share, because you'd be surprised at the roads that are TxDOT, like Main Street is TxDOT. Even though there are brick pavers, it's TxDOT. And so, yeah, we get those questions all the time.
I don't have any other questions. Ken or Mr. Mills?
Mr. Mill.
No more questions for me.
I'm fine, no questions.
Did you have anything else, Elena, or are we good on?
No, that is all that we have.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I will adjourn our meeting at 6:03. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Elena, do I need to sign the minutes from September?